Hello and welcome to UAP Society YouTube. Today we have a very exciting guest. I'm super pleased to bring on Diana Pasulka. So Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka, she is author of the recent book, American Cosmic UFOs, Religion, Technology. The actual book name doesn't have the word "and" in the title there. But Diana Walsh Pasulka, she's a writer, professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion. She has a BA from University of California, Davis, and a master's from Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. She has a Ph.D. as well from Syracuse University. Her research focuses on religion and technology. Her books include Heaven Can Wait. Let's see here. Heaven Can Wait, Purgatory and Catholic Devotional and Popular Culture. It's about purgatory after 1300. That was back in 2014. And then her more recent book, I believe most recent, is American Cosmic UFOs, Religion, Technology. American Cosmic, I'll just read one brief synopsis on it. More than half of American adults and more than 75% of young Americans believe in intelligent extraterrestrial life. This level of belief rivals that of belief in God. American Cosmic examines the mechanisms at work behind the thriving belief system in extraterrestrial life, a system that is changing and even supplanting traditional religions. Diana's a fan and friend to Jacques Vallée and has worked closely with Gary Nolan. She's been investigating the phenomenon deeply from a religious studies expert perspective since 2012. Very excited to talk with her today. Let's bring her on the stream.
Hi, Chris.
Hello, Diana. Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Excellent. So we only have an hour today, and I have many questions. I'm very excited to actually chat with you. I was brought on to you thanks to our UAP Society members. So many of these people talk extremely highly of you. And to be honest, I looked at religious studies, and it was like the stigma in my brain was like, I'm not into religious studies, but it turns out I really am. And reading your book, American Cosmic, I thought it was an amazing book. So far, I haven't finished it, but I certainly will. And so I'm ready to get into these questions. So
great.
If you're ready.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, UAP members, UAP Society members, for letting me speak here today with Chris. That's great. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, we have, let's see, John Iswiscan, Ali, Andres, Beverly. So a lot of people you probably recognize. Thanks for being here. They are very excited. So let's get started. You were led to UFOs basically through your research, from what I understand, in American Cosmic.
Mm-hmm.
Your Catholic research found many orbs of light, spinning suns, and disc-like aerial objects, which led you to this connection. Has this connection increased? Since 2017, since you wrote that book? Are you still seeing it? Are you seeing more? What do you think of your connection between UFOs and religion?
Sure. I think that religion, most of the traditional religions are pretty old, 2,000, 3,000 years old. And a lot of them, especially the Catholic tradition, has a record of these kinds of aerial phenomena. And so, I was not a believer in UFOs at all. Actually, when I started this research in 2012, I thought, I was that terrible person who scoffs, when you say the word UFO. I just go, oh, okay, here we go, right?
Like religious studies, yeah.
Yeah. So exactly. Which so I had been doing a lot of work in archives and looking at manuscripts, and I've been to the Vatican Archive and a lot of other archives. There are others other than the Vatican Archive, and I did see a lot of reports of people who had these experiences, and the ways in which they would interpret them would be based on what they were taught about their life, their cultural framework. So of course they're going to see these. I got in the Catholic tradition specifically, a lot of them would look at the orbs and the discs in the sky as things that were associated with souls from purgatory. And so I kept a log of these. I didn't actually write about them. Excuse me. And so basically one day in late 2011, I had just sent in my manuscript for Heaven Can Wait. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I showed him all of these, reports. There were so many of them, and over a period of 1,000 years. And he said, "This looks like Steven Spielberg movies," And I thought he was crazy. So I said, "No, that doesn't make sense to me." And then it was coincidentally, and I'm sure people who are watching you and you yourself know that there's a lot of coincidence and synchronicity once you start to get into studying this topic. There happened to be a conference in my town about UFOs. So I attended the conference. And when I went there, I heard people talking about UFOs and their experiences with them, now called UAPs. And I realized, wow, that whatever this is still happening. And I have to look at it again. So that's how I started. And then when I did start, a lot of things happened right away that were shocking to a person who had been a boring professor, basically my whole life. And then all of a sudden I met people from CIA and, these kinds of agencies and military. And they were also interested in UFOs, and they wanted to know what I knew about them because I had this history of looking at these things. And so we kind of worked together. So I worked with people. I worked with Gary Nolan, who at the time, because, we have to admit that a lot has happened since 2012. I mean, it's a huge change. It's a 180-degree shift from this being a stigmatized form of knowledge to people being interested in studying it from an academic perspective. I mean, you have Avi Loeb at Harvard studying this now. And so the whole thing has just opened up. So I met Gary Nolan early on. He's a Stanford microbiologist, and he was really interested. And we both, I actually introduced him to this person that I call Tyler, who is in the space program. And it wasn't a space program then, it was the space shuttle program. It became a program, I think, in 2016, 2017, the Space Force. But he was, he's a mission controller and interested in this work. And so he took us to New Mexico, to an alleged site of a crash, which I didn't believe in. Even I opened the book with, I don't believe in this, but I'm going anyway because this is field research and it's interesting. And so he took Gary and I there. We had to be blindfolded because it was under a no-fly zone. And so this is how it all started. And this was before anybody acknowledged that it was okay to look at this stuff. A lot of my colleagues thought I was pretty crazy, and now they all want to study it. So
that's so awesome. Yeah, because this book came out in 2017. So that means
and this came out. No, this came out in 2019, but it was in press in 2017. It takes a long time to write an academic book. You have to get everything fact checked and stuff. And this is with Oxford, so they do a lot of that, especially with the topic. So no, it was like in 2017 that I was finished with the book.
Yeah, so that's before anything was released. That's super courageous. I guess. What do you so your peers, or what were they thinking? Did you get any negative blowback, I guess?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay.
So there was one particular conference that I went to. I'd been invited. Some of my colleagues were on board and thought this was awesome, like Jeff Kripal from Rice University. And, so he and I went to this conference, and we both were invited to speak about our research. Now, you have to understand, I was already a successful professor. It wasn't that, I was already tenured. I was the chair of my department at the time, and I'd won grants and did a lot of external funding. So I'd won research awards at my university, the college's highest research award. So it was already okay. I didn't feel that doing this study was, honestly felt like somebody needed to do this. And so I was going to do it. Again, I didn't understand what was happening, that there would be a huge shift in reality basically for everyone on Earth. So
yeah, you called it epistemological shock. Epistemological. How do you say that? Epistemological.
It's called epistemology. So
epistemology.
Epistemological shock. And that's a shock to your very being and worldview. If so John Mack coined that phrase because he studied this. He was a Harvard professor who studied this, and he was actually investigated by Harvard for doing so. So it wasn't, and he did this in the 80s. And so it wasn't, by the time I did it, I didn't think that it was going to be a problem, but I did have pushback. So I went to this conference. I gave my presentation. Everyone was silent. Nobody spoke. And I
Yeah,
was like, this can't be good. And afterwards, I actually had people tell me that I had been fooled. They
yeah,
said, these people were fooling you. They don't exist. These people are not real. And I'm like, no, I know who this is. I couldn't tell them at the time who they were because Gary didn't want to be known as the guy who studies UFOs. He was also a very successful academic. So, but I knew that it was real. And so it was a wake-up call to me about my field, about academia,
mm,
especially, that they're not prepared to do anything innovative and they're not. They're like,
yeah,
they stay in their corner of where they're supposed, what they've learned at grad school, that's it. And
yeah,
it was depressing to me. And I said, I'm still going to study this because this is
yeah.
happening. And I had to go to different fields. So I went to the fields of technology, media studies, where people had, their minds were a lot more open. And so I started to work with people in different fields. Because they were actually working on the topic in various new capacities, like with technology and things like that, because we're dealing with technology, right?
Mm.
And since we are, they're better equipped to figure this out or to think through these kinds of questions. So that's really the direction that I took with the work. But yeah, I got, and that informed me. That informed the negative feedback I got, because once the government then said, in 2021, these things exist, and now they're actually, I don't know if you saw the latest patch of our military. It's not the Air Force, but it's intelligence, air intelligence, and they have a UFO on there. I was,
No.
oh,
Yeah.
oh, you've got to see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
great. And so I mean, it's out now, and so I can honestly look at my colleagues in the face and say, "Ha!" I'm not going to,
Yeah.
but I mean, seriously, come on, So
Yeah. No,
once
I'm
they,
I'm very happy to hear that. I have videos talking about academia, being
oh, do
stale
you?
and not
Yeah,
willing to listen, and
mhm.
yeah, so
It's really
it's great
sad.
to hear.
Yeah, yeah.
What was your epistemological shock event? Was it a book or a particular
Sure.
event?
It was. It was
Yeah.
this. It happened over a weekend, and it was a very destabilizing experience for me
Mm.
because I was, I had been studying religion my whole life, and I only studied it from the perspective of history. I didn't study it as if it were real. Okay, that's another thing. That's in my field. We study things academically. We don't study them. We don't advocate religion, and we don't. We're not necessarily believers, or we could be, but
Mm.
the way we study religion is that it's something that is a cultural. It's a cultural development, and we study it as belief systems. So, and they're powerful. Religions are powerful. So that's how I studied it. I studied this as from a distance my whole life. And then when I went to the conference and I had read Abduction, um, John Mack's book, and I'd also read my colleague's book, Authors of the Impossible, which has a great chapter on Jacques Vallée. And so I started to read some of Jacques Vallée's work during the weekend, and I just voraciously consumed these books during the weekend. And I also I attended this conference, and I recognized that there was something absolutely real happening. I didn't know what it was, but I did know that it's been around for a long time. And so that was destabilizing to me. That feeling lasted the whole year, really. I mean, it just shook me. And then I was actually working on The Conjuring as a consultant. The Conjuring franchise is the movie, and and so I was working with these screenwriters, and they were they wanted to know what I was doing because they could see that there had been a huge shift in just I guess you could say my attitude or something. I became pretty serious after that. I was, before I was, haha, this and that, laughing a lot. And after this, I was like, wow. And they wanted to know, what's going on. And I told them, I said, I'm doing this research and it's pretty pretty weird.
Wow. Because hadn't thought of it really until I read that in your book, is the epistemological shock, that it's can be a book or an event or a video even. Because for me, it was watching Commander David Fravor. It was
Yes.
actually
Yeah.
on the Lex Friedman,
I
interview
saw it.
podcast.
Yeah.
Although he was on other ones too, I didn't see his other. It was specifically that one I saw it, and that really shook me. Because he spoke everything that I understood. All the words he uses, and I could confirm. Because I was 20 years, 18 years a fighter pilot. I could confirm his legitimacy. It felt everything real, like I was talking to somebody I knew for years.
That's right, because he was a fighter pilot. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what changed me, because before I didn't believe in UFOs at all. I never even looked into it, just even cursory. Never saw anything, in my life. And so that was really, for me, it was an event. And I didn't actually do anything for 6 months. Like you said, it lasted kind of the whole year. I kind of walked around for like a week, and I was just like, I'd be waiting to pick up my kids at school and just like,
Yeah, that's exactly what the feeling was just this all pervasive, almost, it wasn't doom, but it was that everything that I thought I knew was not right. That's how it was, I mean, that's a pretty significant shift.
Yeah, I totally agree. Does everyone have this? I wrote this down. Do you think everyone will have this? And does it have to be a shock, or can it be a gradual change?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So during this time period, I just, as a coincidence, happen to know Brother Guy Consolmagno, and he's the director of the Vatican Observatory. And most people don't know that the Vatican has an observatory where they have monk astrophysicists who live there, and they have telescopes that are very strong, and they look at things in the sky. So Brother Guy I asked him to talk to my class about basically just UFOs, because he had written a book called "Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial?" And he had a great, so this was in 2015, I believe. And so he Skyped into my class and said, and somebody asked him that question, do you believe in ET? And if we did find them, how do you think people would react? And this is what he said. He said, I think that people have been so primed to believe in ET that once that is announced, and he said, I believe it'll be announced at some point. He didn't say if he believed in it or anything like that, so I'm not going to put words in his mouth. But he said, once it's announced, the only people that are going to be really shocked are going to be the people who are scientists. And we're going to say, wow, this is happening. And it's, but everyone else is going to say, oh yeah, we knew that already. And the reason he said that was going to be the case was because we were brought up with Star Wars, and we were, and before us, there, people were brought up with Star Trek. And before that, people were brought up with, whatever the other cosmic TV show was. And now we have video games about it. And now my kids, they're fighting ETs in space on their video games. And, so I think that all of this, and I write about this in my book because I did a lot of cognitive study of belief. When we are within these environments, these media environments, these are working on our brains, right? They're working on our belief structures, what the types of things that we're immersed in them. And it's really hard for us not to believe them. So when I started this research actually when I was doing the Conjuring research. So I wanted to know why when people went to scary movies, especially scary movies about religion, and there are a lot of exorcism movies in the Catholic Church. So it was really easy for me to kind of get on board with those as a consultant. I was actually invited to do that. And so I wanted to know, we say we don't believe, we know that this movie is not real, yet we go and we scream, and then we keep our lights on at night, right? Because we're so terrified of what we saw. Well, there's belief going on, right? And so I wanted to know how that all worked out. And I used a lot of work from people who do cognitive science of technology. And so Brother Guy was hinting at that. Now, this is what's interesting, is the very day after Brother Guy gave that talk in my class, Ellen Stofan, who was the chief NASA scientist at that time, actually came on and did a press release and said, "We're going to find extraterrestrial life. We're going to find it within 20 years. We have the technology to do it. We know where to look." I mean, it was so like, and my students were like, "Wow," So they had that epistemological shock too.
Okay.
And I've noticed a difference in my students. So in the very beginning of the study of this, when I would present stuff like this to my students, some of them would be really freaked out and upset, and so I stopped. But over time, that's not the case anymore. They want to know. In fact, I have a class right now that's so filled up I had to have a waiting list for it, because students are so interested in it.
Wow. So that's basically going back to the Catholic religion. You mentioned a lot of things there. I had a lot of questions, but let's just talk about going back to, let's say, Fátima. Okay, so I kind of mentioned in before the show started that I did a trip to Fátima. I live in Portugal, and so driving by, I went there, and I was very impressed actually by Fátima. And I wasn't raised religious. I was actually a devout atheist, and so I had never heard of Fátima, actually, embarrassingly, right? But so I made a little video here. I'd like to just play it, and hopefully the sound will work. So I'm here in Fátima, where in 1917, an oak tree like this one you see right behind me, right at the top, an apparition appeared to these shepherd kids. So what you'll see behind me, this is the sanctuary. The original cathedral was built in the place of the oak tree. So the original oak tree actually died. They chopped too many pieces of it off, and they built the cathedral. As you can see, thousands of pilgrims coming here. It's a giant site. It's just enormous. I've only been to a few other sites like this in the world. And that's great organ music playing right now. It's loud. Let's see. It's like 1 more minute here. I couldn't talk. Might be tough to continue here. Actually, the sound came through fine. I should have kept going. I mean, there's thousands of people. Pilgrims come from all around to this place based off of this crazy event that happened back in 1917. That's as you enter the city of Fátima. I thought it was a good representation. But inside the chapel, they have other statues of the children. And then the last scene here. This is one of the most famous sightings in history, and definitely one of the most famous in the Catholic religion. The actual oak tree doesn't still stand. They built that chapel right in the place where the original oak tree was, but it was an oak tree very much similar to this one. We're right at the top of that large oak tree. An apparition appeared over many days, many months. And now you can see here it affected many, many thousands of people, and they built this giant structure. Yeah, I translated it there. Maybe too long. That's poor editing there. I don't think you need that long. Yeah, it's just giant. I had no idea. It's a little kind of town out in the middle of nowhere, and has this huge setup. So let me remove that.
Wow, that's really neat.
Yeah, have you been there? Have you been to Fátima?
No, I've never been there, but I've studied it. Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah, I should definitely go. I'm not a huge, I've been to a lot of these sites. This one was giant. I mean, really impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what is so? I passed on it as a video actually because there was just so much baggage.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much with just all the stories. The priest that hijacked the plane. The third the third secret, that we
Right.
think came out, but we're not sure, but then it did. And so anyway, what is your take on Fatima?
Yeah. Okay. So, you have to first understand that first, I've been studying Catholicism my whole life. And the reason I actually went into graduate school was to study Marian apparitions. So, Fatima is, for listeners who don't know, Fatima is what's called in the Catholic religion a Marian apparition. So this is something that happens in the Catholic tradition. The Virgin Mary, who is thought to be the mother of Jesus, appears to people, and the Catholic Church is pretty careful about whether or not they believe in these things. Okay, so Fatima is actually an approved apparition. So the Catholic Church has said, yes, something absolutely supernatural has happened here, and we approve of this apparition. And so, what happened was really interesting. Was I mean, just the general idea was that these three children saw the Virgin Mary, saw a lady basically, and the lady basically told them about the future and what things were going to happen, and that the kids needed to pray, fast, and be good to one another. Just basic, stuff that's not going to hurt anyone, right? Just be good to one another, pray, And she had these secrets that she gave them. Well, they went out and they told the town, the people of the town, and some of the people of the town then came back and they actually witnessed some supernatural things too. And so word just spread like wildfire because Portugal is a very Catholic country. I think it's actually one of the most Catholic countries in the whole world, with the highest rate of Catholic belief. So you should have known about Fatima before you lived there.
Yes, I should have.
'Cause that's okay though,
Yeah,
because now you're making up for it.
yeah.
Um, so basically all of these people started to go with the children to see what was happening. And so the apparition would come down, and I'll talk about the primary sources about that in a minute. But she would come down, and a lot of people couldn't see her, only the children could see her, but they would hear a buzzing sound, or they would feel kind of like electricity in the air, and they could tell that something was happening. And so, this all culminated in a very famous apparition of her a few months after their original apparition,
Mm.
called the Miracle of the Sun. And your
Yes.
listeners and viewers could do an internet search and find Miracle of the Sun and read it, because it's fascinating. Because
Mm.
people miles and miles away could see what was happening, and also there were atheists there. So thousands and thousands and thousands of people showed up because they told the children that she was going to do something. She said, "I'm going to do something, and it's going to be big, and a lot of people are going to see it, and it's going to be proof of my existence," or something to that effect. And so, word spread, and again, like, upwards of 100,000 people showed up. And what they saw, a lot of them, it looks very classically. I talk about it in American Cosmic, because once you start to identify the patterns of these sightings, you start to see them like in Fatima. And I mean, this is my tradition. And I do know that it would make a lot of people, upset. But believe it or not, a lot of Catholics, once they learn what I've had to say to them, it enriches their own belief. Believe it or not.
Mm.
So what happened was that there was a miracle of the sun. So it looked like there was a giant disc that was going to come down and hit everyone. And so a lot of people were screaming. There was rain. A lot of people saw different types of things, which still happens in Marian apparitions, by the way. It happens to people who see UAPs, UFOs. A lot of times they'll see different types of things, but they'll feel that space-time around them is shifted and changes, and people reported this too. One of the best reports of Fátima comes from a doctor who's an atheist, just like you, Chris, a vowed atheist, goes and sees this, and is it basically, this is way before the UFO UAP thing. This is in 1917, and he has an epistemological shock just experiencing what he experienced at the event. And what's interesting for people interested in UFOs and UAPs is that, okay, so this miracle of the sun and these apparitions get approved by the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has a very, very intense process of, in fact, the word the devil's advocate, that actually comes from the process of this process the Catholic Church goes through to basically question these kids, question people who've seen something, because they can't just come out and say any old thing.
I see.
So they go through this really intense process of having somebody basically playing the devil, playing, this didn't exist, you're making it up. They separated the kids out to see if they would get, different versions of the story. They did a lot of things basically, but they came out and said, we believe in this. This happened.
And that's a devil's advocate is the group that does that to confirm if it's a real miracle.
Yeah.
Or not.
So the Catholic Church, this is how they assign a devil's advocate. What they do is they actually choose non-Catholics. Some are Catholics. Most are scientists. They choose atheists. They choose Jewish people. The people have to have amazing credentials. They have to have, PhDs in, something that could help them look to see if something miraculous did happen. So that's what they do. And they compile basically like a team of people who their job is to prove this wrong. That's basically their job. And so they didn't prove it wrong.
Yes.
So they said, yeah, something really, we don't know what happened. But so the idea is that the Virgin Mary did appear to these kids, did talk to them, and then appeared to all of these people. And yeah, so it's a pretty interesting case. I have to say, this is part of the reason why once I started to see the patterns, because, we are trained as academics, so we notice patterns. That's what we do. And so that's, I think, what was the most shocking to me was that the patterns were so similar that I had to say something consistent throughout time has been happening. And I need to, obviously I was already interested in this, but I was looking at it from a historical perspective, like, that happened back then, right?
It was so interesting too. It was telepathic communication. That like you mentioned, so many of the same things. And the apparition said for all these people to come on this day, and she will prove it to them. And then 40,000 people show up, and this whole sun, basically they see the sun dance for many minutes. I think it was like 20 minutes or something. So it was a long period of time. And I guess all the water dried out. They said that it had rained right before then, and then it became dry. So
yeah, everything was just completely dry. Yeah. And
go ahead.
I was going to say, so people, like I said, miles and miles away could see that something really strange was happening in the sky. So there were reports of things, all over the place. And
I saw a very interesting just paper on it when I was researching it about how this could possibly be like laser beams from some other distance, like another planet lasering down, or like space lasers.
Well, I think, so Catholics don't have the only interpretation of it, and it was actually Jacques Vallée who led me to the people who actually did go into the archive and saw the original sources for this, because generally they don't release these original sources to the public, of course. And so there were two academics who wrote, I'm going to have to give you the link to this. So if any of your viewers want to check it out, they should. It's very interesting. But these folks went in without being, without this Catholic lens, and they were looking at the original sources, and they saw a lot of correlations. When the woman descended, she descended on a disc, and that there were some strange disc-like things in the sky prior to her arrival, and there were so many things like the telepathic communication, and she didn't necessarily call herself the Virgin Mary. and so very strange things happened after that. The Catholic Church decided that the children shouldn't talk about it, and one of the main young ladies, that two of them passed away when they were young,
Yeah, quite
which
quickly. Yeah.
which was foretold by the lady, and then the other one was put under a vow of silence until her death.
Yeah, and the third secret. Yeah, it's just so many. There's so much to unpack there. I was surprised by the Vatican, or I guess the Catholic Churches. I guess they accept ET life. Is that correct?
Yeah, they don't find
Yeah.
find that it's in contradiction to their religious tradition or beliefs. And right now they don't have a position on it as such. They just are open to, I've talked to people within the Catholic Church who believe, and then people who don't believe, and then people who kind of see it as, whatever's happening now is kind of a continuation of what was happening. So there's there's a variety of different beliefs right now, and there's no official position. And by the way, when people say they're going there and, and, they're going to get the secret and things. I mean, I've been through I've seen the manuscripts and, the Catholic Church has a lot of other stuff going on. They have people to feed that are hungry all over the world. And, they're really busy. They're not trying. I've not encountered any kind of, we're keeping this, under wraps kind of thing.
And you've studied many other religions, I'm assuming, as well.
Not just I have. Yeah, we do.
I had a question about, like in linguists, they can trace words through languages, right? So, like an example, no. If you look in the Romance languages, it's pretty similar. In German, it's nine. In Portuguese, it's now. So you can tell they're related, or when they interacted. But like in Turkish, the word for no is higher. It's completely different. So it's basically they haven't interacted. But iPhone, it's so recent technology, hasn't changed. My guess is iPhone is the same in all languages. Is there something similar in all these religions? When you track back, is there the phenomenon? Is there a time when the phenomenon interacts with that religion, or do you see it in all base religions? The phenomenon is like the word for fire, or I guess I don't know if I related that
right.
correctly.
No, that's a really good observation. And no, I have not. But what I have found is that you have to take these things on a case by case basis. So when I started my work with Gary Nolan, he does a lot of work with people who have injuries, right? Because of interfacing with something that looks like it might be radiation or some type of, something that can hurt people. And what I found was that there was a lot of these cases, some which became quite famous within Catholicism. And where you have something coming in through the sky. A lot of times they call these seraphs, right, or angels. They don't know what they are at first, and so they just have to make a name for them, like us. We don't know. We just call it UAP or UFO. But do we really know? No, we do not. And so these things come into the atmosphere with sparks and this lights, and then emit some type of looks like radiation or some type of light that could hurt people. And so I started to look at these cases in the history and, compared them to things that, Gary had been looking at as well. So you just basically, I think what we have here and why I think people who do religious studies are so important to the study right now is because we have huge databases of these kinds of things that we can identify. Let's talk about what Tyler and I did when we went to the Vatican. We looked at cases that looked like people were having experiences with this phenomenon. And then we looked at where in time and space they had these, and then what types of, like, say, minerals were in the soil and things like that. We found a lot of patterns. And I think this is the kind of thing that's interesting, because now we have computers to crunch this data. Whereas previously, and also we also have comparative religious studies. So we can look at the same kind of phenomena in Hinduism or in Buddhism, and we could get the same data, and we could just, or we can get data and see if it's similar. That's what we can do.
Yes.
So,
Oh, excellent.
yeah.
Yeah, you can. I guess that's kind of what I was in the vein of what I was asking is, can you compare across these different religions
Oh, absolutely,
and
you
relate it
can.
back
Yeah,
to?
yeah,
Yeah,
you can.
perfect.
Yeah.
You mentioned there, Gary, and I guess we can move on to like the invisible college
Hmm.
and stigma. I guess that's kind of one of the themes I could tell from your book. And my first thought is, and you say in your book as well, is according to polls, I think it was a stiff poll, 50% of Americans believe in extraterrestrial intelligence. My thought is, why is the stigma still so strong?
Yeah, that's really
If
okay.
over
That's the
half
really,
the
yeah,
people
I know,
believe,
and
yeah,
that's old data too. It's bigger,
yeah.
it's increased, so more people believe now.
It's still
Um,
not mainstream though. If I make a video about UFOs, it is less watched than my other videos.
Yeah,
Just
it
the
is.
topic.
Yeah. I think because, first of all, I think a little bit about what Brother Guy said is true is that we've been so acclimated to the topic that we were kind of like, okay, yeah, UFOs, right? What's the next thing kind of thing?
Hmm.
And that I think has been, people have definitely been, it's like overexposed,
Yeah.
because we see it so much in our
Hmm.
entertainment media.
So then to say that it's real crosses some gap, I guess, that people they're not willing to I guess voluntarily accept a epistemological shock. I
No,
think is
they
that,
aren't. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, they're not be
I can
also, you have
understand.
to understand that Project Blue Book, it was,
Hmm.
successful because Project Blue Book was a debunking campaign, where,
Yeah.
basically Alan Hynek did this, went out and said, "No, that's not a UFO, that's swamp gas," or, "No, that's not a UFO, that's, this or that." And also they made it ridiculous. They made the belief in it ridiculous.
Yeah.
No one wants to be ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So I think that they did a really good job. Project Blue Book did, and the people
The
who
Air
were
Force.
part of it. Yeah, yeah, they really did.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like you got to give them credit for that because they did what they were supposed to do.
And the
They
data I've heard is very compelling, actually. The actual Blue Book data that they released.
and I think that they have to release it now. And I know you're an ex-military guy. Sorry,
Yes.
but they have to release it now because China has its own space programs, and so do other countries. It's not just us and Russia. And we kind of had this pact that we were
Yeah.
gonna, because Russia also had its debunking programs, right?
Hmm.
And so that's where the stigma comes from, is that they were really good at what they did. And so people are like, oh, that's ridiculous. But now these other countries are coming out and seeing the same kinds of things. We're not going to be able to hide it anymore. And so we're forced, our hand is forced as a country to talk about it.
You mentioned as well, so Gary Nolan, I'm a huge fan. I'm a fan of Jacques Vallée. I love his work. There is one with Hal Puthoff as well.
Mhm.
But I remember back when we invaded Iraq, again, based on weapons of mass destruction
Right.
data. And, I was in I was in the Air Force. So I looked into it quite a bit, actually. And from what I could tell is that the information seemed to come incorrectly from like one single source. And that single source was spread. And so what happens is people didn't realize it was all coming from the same source. They hear it from all these different angles and they're like, oh man, they have weapons of mass destruction. It's 100% correct. And when I look back, it seems like everything goes back to Stanford and the CIA. It's like Hal Puthoff worked for the CIA. I'm like, he worked for the CIA. They're working on remote viewing experiments, and you look at Jacques Vallée, and, he's been involved with Hal Puthoff for decades. And then you look at Bigelow now. Bigelow was also involved with the government, also involved with Skinwalker Ranch. So I just feel like the gene pool for investigators is just very, very thin. What is your
Yeah.
take on that?
Yeah. Well, of course, as a person who hadn't been exposed at all to UFOs prior to 2012, and then coming in and having this massive learning curve and just kind of getting way up to speed with because it's the Invisible College was the group of folks that were studying this. We're talking, you just spoke of several members of the Invisible College. Okay. I immediately became associated with them, and mostly because I think they were interested in my research. They were like, okay, we've got someone who can go to the Vatican and look at these manuscripts with this kind of. But I also became associated with another group that I called the Fight Club, and it was like the next generation past the Invisible College. And the Fight Club were people that weren't going to come out with their names. They weren't going to say, they weren't going to write books. They weren't going to be associated with UFOs so that they could study it, so that they could actually not do the work of disinformation, but do the work of studying it. And so I recognized that there were these two, and I actually introduced them to each other. Several people from the Invisible, I introduced them. It didn't really go well, right? Okay. Yeah. It went well with Gary because he was like me. He was an academic who was coming into it. So there was these various types of ways in which the government compartmentalized itself in order to study these things. And I don't really talk to the Invisible College people anymore. I was so involved with them that I felt like I was being manipulated and used. And so I basically disassociated. I still like and respect every one of them. I still work with Jacques because he does a lot of stuff that I would consider academic scholarship, right? He did Passport to Magonia. Totally looks like an academic book, okay? And he does a lot of really what I would call academic scholarship. So yeah, I associate with him. Gary Nolan is on the periphery, but I wouldn't consider him an Invisible College associate. There are a lot of people that Rick Doty reached out to me, right? And said he liked my book, and there was some things there. So I just said, in order to maintain my integrity, to do the work that I do, I have to disassociate from people that I feel could either try to feed me misinfo, because I've got enough info on my own through the research that I do. And so I had to make that was after my book was written that I made this decision, so I could kind of continue on with doing this research.
Yeah, there could be a conflict of interest. You just don't know.
Yeah.
So why risk it when you can?
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel much the same way. People are like, why don't you interview this person or get them on the show? And I'm like, well, they've done thousands of interviews. I can just watch what they did before. But very interesting. How can people trust these? I guess, if you work for the CIA for decades, like
that's your job. Yeah.
But then I work for the Air Force, they're very good at Blue Book. So I think the information needs to be on its own. And I love open source. I like transparency. I think I'm on the academic side of being transparent. But then like you said, I feel like the academic community needs some more people like you to really, I don't know, punch them in the face, with truth. Kind of the thing. We only have a couple more minutes. I want to get on to one other really major section is technology, because I noticed on your book, I actually put it up, the title, I've written a couple books as well. And I know how much time I'm surely spent on your title. And I noticed you took the word "and" out of, you have UFOs, religion, technology, right? There's no "and" technology. And so I guess technology there is as important, I would guess, as the other ones. And you probably would have led with it, but you thought, no, I'm going to put the "and" because people are going to be surprised by technology. My question is, do you think technology is different from nature? Basically, do you think it's the same?
I think that technology, so part of what I say in my book, I get pretty deep in it actually. And I don't think a lot of people are, willing to go there, but that's okay. There are a lot of assumptions about technology that just need to be, put to rest. And one is that it is it's a historical epoch that we're in right now, where technology and we as techno beings are embarking on this new, basically new part of evolution, I would call it. And so I think when we look back, we see that, nature is biotech. Okay. So Tyler was a biotechnologist. He did a lot of work with this UAP stuff where he was basically creating inserts for cancer patients, using technology, inserting technology into them and helping them live, right? And so I thought, and he was doing this through his work in the space program. So I thought that this was really fascinating. And I had already studied technology. I mean, I grew up in California. I went to graduate school during the dot-com boom. So I saw a lot of the shift. I was using computers in 8th grade. And, by the time I hit grad school, or I'm sorry, undergraduate, we actually had email, although we didn't have the kind of internet we have now, right? We couldn't like surf on it or anything like that. But so, I could see the complete shift that we were all going through. And so, no, I do not see this difference. What I see is that we're creating, like, especially through AI, we're creating a relationship with technology. And I think that in many ways, I opened my book with a quote by David Bowie. The internet is an alien life force, right?
The Google. I work for the Google now. I always
you?
talk about it. Yeah, it gives me, on YouTube Studio, it'd be like, you consider what you did on this video that was different from your other videos. Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's totally
That's
AI.
fascinating. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I guess because what I've seen growing up, like I mentioned, as an atheist, is humans, we seem to put ourselves on this pedestal in all senses. We are the center of the whole universe, essentially, right? Which makes sense. We have one perspective. No one even knows what consciousness really is. But what I notice is that humans, particularly, we are not one of the animals, right? We are separate from nature. There's human cities, human buildings, human technology, and then there's nature, But like when a bee has wings to fly, is that technology? Is that bee tech? Or differently, I think it's still it's a technology. It's something that the bee created through evolution, essentially. But now I see nature, like a human city, I consider is just as natural as a forest. In my brain, it's just it's evolving. So I see us inside of a larger organism of the nation state, essentially, and that is evolving along with us, and it communicates through us, through the internet or however else. It's basically
Yeah.
my own perspective. But as far as technology, we have our own issues with technology. For NFTs, so non-fungible tokens, right? We talked a little bit before, but basically, I mentioned if I make a video about flying, right, it's kind of mainstream. A lot of it has a wide appeal. If I make another video about UFOs now, it's less, so quite a bit less. So I think the stigma we kind of talked about. If I mention NFTs, like it doesn't even make the list. The people in the UFO world will not even look at this technology. Which I think is Web3, blockchain, decentralized technology. You mentioned kind of technology and your new book. What is your take on non-fungible tokens and this new Web3 tech everyone hates?
Yeah, so I see the impetus of decentralization. I think it's happening regardless of what we do. It's going to happen anyway. And I think that in a lot of ways, this is going to be counterintuitive thinking here to people, but in a lot of ways, you touched upon it yourself, is that we are humans, in a sense, are being used to create the next, our new way of living. I think it's always been that way, but we haven't seen it that way, right? I think that the cities that you talk about, and now the virtual worlds that we inhabit, these are being created and we are creating them. But I think that the direction is something that's almost, I call it an external agent, right? Even if it's not an external agent, it sure does seem like it and feel that way, because a lot of people, if we look at bees and hives, it looks like we're becoming much more aware of our hive-like ability now that there's so many of us and we're connected through these communities like your UAP society and that type of thing. I actually view that as a good thing. I don't view that as a bad thing. I think that the decentralization that is going to happen, hopefully, as we move forward, well, there's a lot of things that can happen. But one of the most important things is that you can't put the genie back in the bottle, that it's already here. And so you best study it and understand what's happening. And I told my students this a long time ago, even before I studied UFOs. I said, it's here, and you'd better learn it so you don't get used by it. Because I had a lot of students who were basically glued to their phones, right? And they're glued to them physiologically. They're
Yeah.
not glued to them because they just happen to be there and they pick them up and they want to know. They're glued to them because it's like a drug, right? So they are, they get dopamine hits from them. So, and I said, yeah, okay. So this is a technology that you'd better understand, or else, because it's going to create a shift in basically demographics. It's going to create, those who can do it and program, and those who can't.
Yes.
And you're going to be in this can't category, and that's not going to be good for you, is basically what I told them. And now I see that was about 10 years ago. Now I see it completely that way. I mean, we have different different communities of people. It's also, I think that we have to be really, I work with people who are doing military, they're basically looking at technology, especially social media, as weaponized. And, because I teach young people, these are the targets. And so, how can we help these young people become aware that they're now targets?
Yeah, and you see it of all ages. It's old people, young, my parents and my kids and myself, right? All addicted to technology, to screens. So it's definitely coming. My own, I guess, theory. The way I'm investigating is I believe that these organizations, corporations, and nations are just other forms of life, larger forms of life on higher dimensional levels than us. Just like your cell. If you look into one little cell in your body, it's going to have your DNA in it, right? But where are you? Where do you exist? Are you inside one of your little cells? I don't think so. I just killed 1 million. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
You know what you sound like? You sound like a Buddhist.
A Buddhist.
Yeah. So here you're an atheist and you're asking a Buddhist question.
I was an atheist. I have to say I've been epistemologically shocked into something else, which I really am happy. I'm happy the phenomena exists. I'm happy to see people opening their minds and realizing, maybe we can realize that we don't need mass wars. I think if you can show that the nations are actually alive, if we can show the nations that we exist, I think that's the issue, is that the nations don't care about human life. Ultimately, we just like you don't care so much about yourselves. You hope they all show up for work, but otherwise you don't really care. And so, maybe we can show that violence isn't necessarily needed. We can move forward. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, I agree with you. I share your enthusiasm, definitely.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I think that's all the time we have, Diana. I guess any last questions or points you have? You talked about your new book. Is it coming out?
Yeah.
Do you want to mention it?
Yeah. My new book is still in process. After American Cosmic, I met a lot of people in the tech community who had the same kind of belief structures about technology that you do, actually. And then I recognized that, I'm talking about the shift, and there are stakes involved here. There's big stakes about, who's going to be hooked in and who's not. And I think that so my book is really about that, and I mean, it has to do with UFOs because we perceive them as tech, right? And so we want to, so what's happening. So that's what it's about.
Jacques Vallée, he was big on that. That basically it's a psychic and physical technology, right? The UFO.
Yeah, that's originally what got me interested in his work, and now I feel like absolutely he was really understanding it in the 70s. He had it kind of, he knew what he was doing. But again, working like for the Stanford Research Institute and like that. Yeah.
With the CIA.
On ARPANET, which is the proto-internet.
The proto Skynet.
Yeah.
All interesting. Well, thank you so much, Diana, and thanks for everyone that attended. I read through your chats as we went, and I hope we answered most of your questions. It was very interesting, and always happy to have you on again, Diana. Hopefully, when you release your book, maybe you'll be interested in coming back on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you ever come, if you want to come see Fátima, I promise I will go. I'll take you up
Okay.
there and drive you
All
around.
right. Yeah. We should make
I
a
will.
video about it. That would be really cool.
100%. Because I wanted to make a video. I went there. I just didn't feel like I had those thousands of years of knowledge, you know, that apparently is needed to crack this. So excellent. Thank you, Diana.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Take care.
All right. Take care. And thanks, everyone.
Bye.